indigenous Arndelft here. So, I was just watching a video by the Templin Institute about why didn't Starfleet Command use Starfighters? And if you think about it, I don't really remember any of the factions, any of them, that really properly use Starfighters to any significant degree. You'd see some occasional use of Starfighters once in a while, but it was the exception, not the rule. And considering just how many fandoms out there exceedingly use Starfighters, I'm not a big fan of Battlestar Galactica, but I've certainly seen plenty in them. Star Wars certainly has not only used Starfighters, but it's shown how there can even be Starfighters, which, in significant enough numbers, can be serious threats to capital ships, just like in our modern day. A few fighters versus a battleship won't be much of a threat, but in significant enough swarms, they'll rip battleships apart. Battleships, which are these huge, laboring beasts, but they have to have point defense weapons that are pinpoint accurate. Have pinpoint accuracy to knock in this case, just, fighters out of the sky. Yeah, when there's too many of them, they're launching missiles, from a distance and whatnot. It's like, that becomes a huge issue. Swarms of fighters can take apart a battleship from a distance. In any case, and when it comes to Star Trek, the Templin Institute made a really good point about why Starfighters might not be being used. In my opinion, the primary reason is short-sightedness on the part of the writers and or possibly strictly just budget restrictions. Because if you think about it, they do have to create every single set that they work with. And creating one, I heard that there were a lot of issues just creating the shuttles that they use in Star Trek. You add on to that, sorry about that, Starfighters. Yeah, that could have been an issue. Don't know. But he does come up with a great point to actually justify that is never brought up in Star Trek. Because if they'd actually have thought of that, sooner or later somebody would have asked about it. Especially during Deep Space Nine, where O'Brien and Bashir loved to hop onto the holodeck and do dogfights in fighters. Reliving, I think it was, World War II. They loved to do that all the time. So with, these thoughts in mind, there were even golden opportunities to just have a throwaway line about why Starfighters aren't used in modern Star Trek. It never happened. But finally getting to the Templin Institute, they pointed out how phasers, which fire, they get to their targets extremely fast. Though notice how those fighters, those targets are always within visual line of sight. If you know enough about space, you know that if you're within line of sight of something in space, you're practically at point blank range at that point. So we don't have a truly accurate way to judge just how fast those things, phasers go, but we can judge it based off of Star Wars, for example, which heavily uses Starfighters and ship-to-ship combat, and they're always within visual line of sight of each other, always. Where in reality, in that kind of scenario, they would be fighting battles where visually they would not be within line of sight of each other, but almost ever. It would be very rare for them to be that close. Sorry, getting back on topic. The Templin Institute pointed out how phasers are pinpoint accurate, though, especially with how close Starfighters, because their weapons wouldn't be as powerful, they wouldn't have as strong of a reactors because they're just not big enough for it, and they would have to get much closer to their targets before they'd actually be able to utilize their weapons. And phasers are extremely accurate. That has been shown time and time again, how they will pinpoint small targets and just wipe them out. However, I just remembered the Scimitar was a full-blown capital ship. It was a fast, agile capital ship, but it was still a capital ship. And the Enterprise E did have a hard time pinpointing it. They knocked down its shields for just a moment, Oh wait, no. I'm getting confused. The phasers did hit. They used the phasers to actually hit the thing, so then they knew where it was and tried to fire off the torpedoes. The torpedoes were what were too slow to actually hit the scimitar while they were battling. So it wasn't phasers. It was torpedoes. So yeah, phasers are incredibly fast. When at least it comes to that close of range. Whereas in Star Wars, they've shown time and time again, there's actually measurable moment before the shots that these ships are firing off at each other actually impact. And this would naturally impact, when they're trying to shoot down fast, agile starfighters with shots that move that slowly. Yeah, even when the starfighters are in close, they would have more difficulty with that. Whereas phasers, they can fire in multiple directions at once. They can do tiny little bitty bursts, just like and they can just pick starfighters out of the sky. I saw a versus battle once where they had the Enterprise D versus a Star Destroyer, and the Star Destroyer launched its TIE fighters, and they did accurately pinpoint that since TIE fighters have no shields, the Enterprise D, with absolute ease, just wiped them out. They had both the Enterprise D and E do that, I believe. And they just blew those things to Kingdom Come in a few seconds. And they actually had Darth Vader looking at that going, huh. Probably picturing in his head, what if I'd gone out there? Not even my Force abilities would probably have been able to save me from that. Like, those are some pinpoint accurate weapons. Something like that, even though phasers are incredibly weaker than the turbo lasers that they use on capital ships in Star Wars, the sheer accuracy of the Federation's weapons and the speed of which a phaser fires, which would be a revolution, an absolute revolution for Imperial technology in the event they were able to get their hands on something like that, which in a sequence where Vader was actually there and present and saw that, considering that the Rebellion primarily used starfighters as their means of combat, would have been one of the first things on Vader's mind. He'd been like, yeah, we're capturing this ship. And they would have had more than enough stormtroopers on board. Like, I think the average Star Destroyer had thousands of stormtroopers on board, which means if they had ever gotten the opportunity to actually invade a the Enterprise, yeah, the crew would have been overwhelmed in very short order. That would have been a one-sided battle and then some. Unless they could have thought of some unorthodox way in which to fight back. The Federation has proven time and time again they're very good at adapting to their foe, especially on the fly. They have proven that over and over again. That is not to be understated. In any case, though, moving on. A little bit difficult. So the point that he was making was, the Templin Institute, was that the point of it in the end with how accurate phasers were, they were kind of outmoding fighters. Because at that point, with reactor output going to weapons and shields, it became, technologically speaking, a battle between how much reactor output you could put out. The Romulans had their own way of doing it. I don't remember exactly what their version of the warp core was. I think it was basically a quantum singularity or black hole or something like that, like a miniaturized one that they had in containment. But I think they called it a quantum singularity or something like that. And when one started breaching containment for them, it would actually start screwing with time. That was actually covered in an episode of The Next Generation. Caused all sorts of freakish, weird accidents. That episode was weird. Anyway, but overall, yeah, that was a really good point. And I know it took me an absolute age to even get out what his point was, but saying, in the regard to the fact that with how accurate phasers are, it's just a matter of overwhelming the target shields, and if it's, at that point, fighters cannot, due to their small size, cannot have the shield output in order to be able to remotely defy the weapon output of a capital ship with that kind of accuracy. And it's true, we never got to truly see really agile fighters, like super agile ones that rely on their speed, and with inertial dampeners, you could really push that. At that point, it'd be, how fast can the pilots, still like maneuver around and still tell actually where they're going and whatnot, and still remain in control of the craft. But technology could be advancing in that area. But still, at that point, they just need to upgrade their targeting sensors and whatnot to be able to pinpoint those fighters. So to actually make fighters viable in Star Trek, I genuinely believe that they would need to go down the course of stealth technology. Now, stealth technology has been somewhat explored with cloaking in Star Trek, which I want to make very, very clear here. Cloaking is not a... the fact that you would see the ships visually disappear just makes them disappear off of visual sensors. In other words, sensors that actually rely off light to see. And that is just a byproduct to make sure that your enemy can't see you via that form of detection. And that's just one form of sensors for all ships in space would utilize, at least in Star Trek. Whereas the more important part of cloaking would be to make it so the ship itself, its energy signature is reduced to the point where it can't be picked up, to where things like radar or things like that can't get an accurate feed off it. I don't know exactly how the sensors in Star Trek work, but the point is stealth technology combats sensors, and there were plenty of races that did delve deeply into stealth technology. And there could have been plenty of races that really, really put that to their advantage, who had fast, nimble, agile starfighters that had all their energy poured into their engines and weapons that in large enough groups could overwhelm the shields of a particular quadrant of shields on a capital ship, punch through those. And don't forget about torpedoes. They could carry torpedoes to be able to help them punch through that don't rely off of energy. And, where using torpedoes versus starfighters is like negligible because you actually have to have enough accuracy to actually have it at least explode near them, let alone actually strike one. But for fighters using torpedoes, they just have to have big enough ones to actually be able to make a dent, which if they're not so much worried about accuracy, since it's a big slow moving target compared to them, then they can just worry about, they can even just carry straight up bombs that they just do a strafing run on it, pull away as they deploy their bombs, it smashes into the shields, detonates. Yeah, I can see starfighters absolutely being able to overwhelm shields in Star Trek. That could be used to enormously great effect, and I would have loved to have seen it utilized. But stealth technology would have been the way to go with that. And the Romulans already would have had a leg up in that department, except maybe in how they use their energy technology. I don't know, if they had other modes of energy technology besides a quantum singularity, but it would be possible that they couldn't fit that kind of thing into a fighter. So they might have had issues in that department. Klingons, on the other hand, I think they have warp cores rather than quantum singularities. And we've already proven at least the Federation can make warp cores small enough because they put them on shuttlecraft that can go decently fast. Just look at runabouts. Those things are incredibly smaller than their capital ship counterparts. And they can get up to, I think, warp 7, which means they can get some decent speed out of that. And they have decent shields. It's not like it's something that can stand up to a capital ship for more than a few seconds, but still, it's shields. And that means they'd be able to survive a non-direct hit from a torpedo. Like if a torpedo detonated next to a runabout, it wouldn't outright destroy them. It might damage them, but it wouldn't destroy them. And their maneuvering ability was decent. I wouldn't call it great, but then again, they weren't particularly designed for that. They were an overall craft. So with these things in mind, if the Klingons were able to make, warp core small enough, then they could go that way, or they could just go the route of carriers. They could create, they don't need them to go to warp, so they could, Romulans and Klingons could use their already existing knowledge of stealth technology to make much, much smaller craft with non-warp capable energy cores, and then just have them reboard carriers. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure those fighters on board the Scimitar, they did. I mean, they might have been warp capable, but that would have been, considering that literally it was just a cockpit, not a runabout or a shuttle. It was just a cockpit on board this very compact fighter. And by the way, those fighters did have shields. I was like, maybe that thing was capable of warp. I don't know. I would have to do more research into that to see. But yeah, those things were compact. Frag, they were. But that is a little bit later in the Star Trek storyline. I'm talking more like Next Generation still. Yeah. But even in Star Trek Nemesis age. Anyway, though, but still then, like, the Scimitar's fighters were never deployed either. And that is something that the Templin Institute does bring up. Like, what do you think about that? They were asking. For me, I think it was a massive waste. I think it would have been an interesting addition to see those starfighters at work trying to swarm the Enterprise, and the Enterprise trying to pick them off, as well as fight with the Scimitar. And those fighters could have been, just literally trying to board to capture Picard. And that could have been... then again, that could have made the movie very bloated. I can kind of see why they never... But why include them in the first place? All you did was make us want them. It's very frustrating. Anyway, though, those are a lot of my thoughts on that. I think stealth technology would have been an amazing way to actually make those a deep integrated part of the universe. It's never even truly mentioned. I don't remember it being mentioned anywhere why they aren't really a part of it, besides on extremely rare cases, like when they were trying to return to Deep Space Nine. And what was that? Operation Return, I think it was called. And that's what the Templin Institute, I think, called it. Its name, when Cisco tries to fight through that fleet to return to Deep Space Nine. And those fighters had never been seen before. This was a desperate Federation. I agree with the Templin Institute that they were not the rule. They were the exception. And they'd probably been scraped together by the Federation as an emergency last-ditch effort to mobilize everything and anything they had. The one single argument I can think of to possibly argue with that is in that episode where Wesley Crusher and is still at the academy, and he and some classmates are pulling a maneuver around, what was it, Titan, a moon of Mars, and there was an accident. There was that whole kerfuffle, but that's not the point. The fact is, they were pulling high-speed maneuvers in fighter-like shuttlecraft. And that got me thinking. I was like, wait, so it's... The writers were thinking about that just a little bit. Why have your cadets doing anything in those at all unless it's a thing? Unless it's actually a thing. Unless they were just like, okay, those shuttlecraft are actually a thing that some fighters have, or maybe it was just shuttle experience. I don't know. They seem much more like starfighters than they did shuttles, in my opinion. I'll have to go back and rewatch that episode before I really know for certain. But the more I think about it, with how much I love starfighters in Star Wars, especially the Clone Wars, my favorite ship of all time is the Venator class. Star Destroyer. And by the way, a Venator with a full complement of fighters and pilots to fly them versus a Star Destroyer, one-sided fight, but not in the direction you're always told. Star Destroyers got picked apart by the Rebellion sometimes due to their fighters. What if the Rebellion had ever gotten a hold of a Venator with their shit? Like, oftentimes the Rebellion's problem was storing their starfighters. What if they had a Venator, which had a powerful hyperdrive for its size, powerful energy generation, and could outrun a Star Destroyer? It would be simple enough for them just to jump ahead of, if a Star Destroyer ever did get in close enough, they could just do a quick jump into hyperspace and then jump out while their fighters continue to swarm a Star Destroyer from a distance. The Venator just needs to keep away from the Star Destroyer while its incredibly poor point defense system attempts to deal with the fighters. I mean, the Imperial Star Destroyer 1, the Class 1, had a decent amount of point defense weapons. But due to their continuation of the Tarkin Doctrine, the number 2 version of the Star Destroyer had even worse point defense weapons. They focused even more heavily onto anti-capital ship weapons, which in the short term was terrible versus the Rebellion. Long term, though, I absolutely understand why it happened, because Palpatine wasn't actually preparing to deal with the Rebellion. He was preparing to have his to be able to fight a massive threat from outside of the galaxy that he knew about from before he actually even took power, I believe. Yeah, before he even took power over the Senate, over the Republic. And that's a video for another day. That's been covered to death and quite interesting. But that, in my opinion, that is also the reason why he had no shields on his TIE fighters, because the threat gathering outside of the galaxy had, like, their weapons punched straight through shields. Like the shields weren't there. Even their smallest weapons act as though the shields weren't there. I think Palpatine knew that and just never bothered to have shields on his TIE fighters to get his pilots used to the fact that their shields would be useless, and they were just relying off pure maneuverability. Anyway, though, oh dang, I said that was a video for another day. And then naturally, ADHD covered it anyway. Anyway, though, that is my rather long-winded opinion on that subject. I'd like to know what people think, what your thoughts are on this. If by some miracle the Templin Institute happens to see this video, as it is a reply to his, what are your thoughts? Do you think stealth technology, especially by the Klingons and the Romulans, would have been an amazing way to counter, just to have their own starfighter corps that could have, at least versus like Cardassians, versus the, and versus each other, where it is trying to get better and better sensor technology, where capital ships could, they would fear being swarmed by, swarms of fighter squadrons using stealth technology. That would be a terror. That'd be like, if you were like remotely thinking that was in the area as a captain of your ship, you'd be like ready to go into warp at a moment's notice, which, while you're deep in a solar system, and yes, I know they break this rule a lot, but it is canon within Star Trek that while you're deep within a solar system, due to like the gravimetric shear of having planets around and whatnot, I think, you can be torn apart by going to warp inside of a solar system. So being inside a solar system where you're not able to go to warp, your one prayer would be at impulse to hopefully be able to outrun any starfighters until you could get out of the gravity of a solar system and then go to warp and then completely outrun any starfighters. Starfighters that can go to warp would be just terrifying. Because if they can go to warp, and if they're fast enough to catch you in warp and you still can't detect them, that would be terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. I can see that turning wars around. I can see that ending empires. The Federation, in my opinion, on one final note here, hopefully, the Federation would by far be the deadliest threat when it came to making these stealth starfighters, in my opinion, due to their ability to... They already had small warp cores. They already had the ability to make it so starfighters could go to warp. Not starfighters, but shuttlecraft could go to warp. If they were to compact that into starfighter size, make them stealth starfighters, difficult to detect, rather than having shields pouring all their power into engines and phasers, and not to mention being able to carry payloads of bombs and or torpedoes. Just think, oh my gosh, that would be terrifying. Just think about that. That would be absolutely terrifying. The Federation would be a force to be reckoned with, because, in my opinion, in that regard, they were one of the supreme factors. And if you think about that, the Dominion War would have been so different if they'd had that going into it. Because if they already weren't worried about shields and just had their stealth technology, which the Federation showed they were very good at being able to make stealth technology if they wanted to. If they wanted to, they could have easily outdone the Romulans, which the Klingons stole their stealth technology from the Romulans. That's where they got it from. And why didn't the Cardassians? They had to have captured. I mean, Gul Dukat captures a bird of prey at one point. How did the Cardassians never get a hold and um, reverse engineer their own stealth technology? I don't know why that never happened. But anyway, though, I believe the Federation could have been dominant in that area. But the reason why they technically couldn't do that was because of their treaty with the Romulans that precluded them from being able to pursue stealth technology, except for the shadier parts of the Federation, which did it all the time. I don't know, like Section 31, they would have had no qualms about doing that. And why they didn't have their own private fleet where they designed those kind of ships and whatnot, I have no idea. Although the deadly thing about Section 31 is that they never actually had a headquarters. They were a group of individuals scattered throughout the Federation. There was no one location that had like their information stored up and kind of thing, which doesn't mean they didn't have small little stockpiles of information here or there, and actual headquarters with limited amount of info at them. But Section 31 did get away with existing for so long because the only way to get information from them would be to capture and interrogate members who would commit suicide if and when captured. Any case, though, yeah, those are my opinions, my scatterbrained ADHD opinions scattered all over the place. If you've been listening this long, thank you very much. And please let me know what your opinions and thoughts are down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. Y'all are absolutely awesome. Thanks for putting up with my ADHD. It is genuinely a struggle. It is. It really is a struggle. And, yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please throw it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thanks for watching this long. And if you're new to the channel and genuinely enjoy this kind of content, please subscribe and let me know down in the comment section that you'd like to see more. Literally, if this video is what caused you to subscribe to my channel, let me know. It doesn't have to be in-depth comment or anything. Just be like, hey, I subbed because of this video. That way I know to make more like it. It's a little bit difficult to find out what videos people sub to, and so what kind of content to make. In any case, though, y'all are absolutely awesome. I'll see you next time, and don't y'all be getting into too much trouble, or do. It's always up to you. Doodles, Legionist.